Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey. On this episode, I speak with CK DesGrosseilliers. She's a spokesman for Threads of Life, a victims group that works to end workplace tragedies and cares for the families left behind when they occur. Our conversation focused on recent changes made by the Ontario government, where instead of a mandatory inquest following a construction-related death, a system which currently has a backlog of over 100 cases, the province will move to a new annual review process. While the change has seen cautious support from industry stakeholders, DesGrosseilliers said there would be less of a backlog if findings and recommendations from past inquests had been implemented. For her, it's personal. Her brother, Tim DesGrosseilliers, a unionized elevator constructor, died in a Toronto mishap in September 2017. Here's our interview. I guess my first question is, what is your general take on this new direction that they're taking with the inquest rules, which previously they would do it on a case-by-case basis, and now it's at the end of the year, and they've given reasons for that, but I want to know what you think of it.
Well, I think that they're responding to some pressure to move through these coroner's inquests faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's certainly an issue for families. I think the longest standing coroner's inquest that's still waiting to happen is over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And many people are at the 5 or 6 year mark. And I know that families want answers, and I'm very sympathetic to that. I was fortunate. My brother's inquest happened
Mm-hmm.
during COVID, and it was only 3 years after he was killed. So 3 years is relatively short. And I do appreciate that there are learnings that can be taken from situations that might be in common, but I think there's another way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that by doing away with coroner's inquests, we're going to miss the nuances. We're going to miss the unique situation that caused someone's death. And I think that if the government wants to lower the number of inquests that it has to do, it should be looking at enforcement. Mm-hmm. Because there are recommendations that have come out of coroner's inquests over the last 10, 20, 30 years that have not been implemented, and people are still dying for the same reasons. Mm-hmm. So lower the number of inquests by lowering the number of people that are killed by introducing the recommendations that have come out of the inquests.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're a spokesperson for Threads of Life, right? And so maybe you could explain what that is and how they kind of work towards this mission you're just talking about now, about changing things.
Yes. Threads of Life is a national charity that provides support to families and individuals that have experienced a workplace tragedy. So that includes workplace fatalities like my brother's, occupational illness, or life-altering injuries. It also provides families like my own with a voice in promoting health and safety. I have been a volunteer speaker for Threads of Life for 4 years, and I've presented to workplace groups, to contractors groups, health and safety professionals about the importance of health and safety, really kind of bringing the emotion. Our speakers bring the emotion. Mm-hmm. And the reasons why health and safety is so important, why everyone wants you to get home tonight. And I am now the Speakers Bureau coordinator. So mm-hmm. I manage the other, the speaker volunteers. We have about 70 to 80 across the country that go into workplaces and tell their family story or their individual stories about workplace incidents.
Now, I would imagine you don't have just your own experience to draw on, which is, tragic, obviously, but you've also got other people's experiences. And from that, you can sort of gather a more holistic idea of what the situation is. And on the other side of things, not to make this adversarial or anything, somebody who's doing the inquest itself, they have to be clinical about it. That's how they have to get their job done. You are the exact opposite of that. You kind of see how the end results are and how people are feeling about it.
Yeah, I am sympathetic to all the families that are waiting for a coroner's inquest. I have heard the stories, and I can't imagine, it's 5 years from my brother's death. still waiting to find out the answers. But we didn't get the answers without going through the coroner's inquest. They devoted 4 days to questions and answers, and we had an opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses as well. There was a coroner's jury that listened to all of this and came back with 15 recommendations. And those recommendations have no power. But we didn't know going into Tim's inquest what exactly might have been the cause of his death. Like, we know it was a piece of equipment falling from the rigging onto him in the shaft, but why did he make those decisions? And that came out through the questioning, through the 4 days of questioning. And I know that, now they're starting to do these combined inquests. I know that they did 7 deaths over an 8-day inquest, and each death got 1 day. How do you find the unique circumstances that might, on the surface, they might all look the same, but how do you find out the unique situation that put that person in that place at that time and led to their death if you're doing it so quickly?
That was going to be my next question, because it's going to be on a yearly basis now, I guess. And so I assume you're saying here that they're going to, maybe not on purpose, but they might end up rushing things because of that, because they've got X amount of time, as opposed to, yes, it takes longer to get there, but you're actually going to study it more if it's on an individualized basis.
Exactly. Or they're going to look for commonalities as opposed to the unique situation that led to the death. They were 7 people died because they fell off a ladder. Well, why were they up on the ladder? You don't know the answers until you ask the questions. And what you're eliminating by shortening the process is the opportunity to ask the questions, to really get to what's going on, or what happened that day. And I think, there is some value in looking at common incidents to see if there are ways to eliminate them. But I've worked with enough researchers in my life. You do a survey. You survey the results. You survey the recommendations, and you come. And that's the thing. We as taxpayers, we as family members have been going through coroner's inquests and paying for them for decades without those recommendations being enforced. And those are the things that prevent future deaths.
Now, what stage is this at? Is this a proposal by the government, or are they actually going forward with this? Is it just the rule of law, for lack of a better term, now? And then what options do you have via Threads of Life to change that, if you do?
Well, I think speaking up and having more families speak up if this is a concern to them as it is to my family. And I've spoken to my sister. My sister and I both went through the inquest. So we make our decisions. We tend to make them as a family. So I'm speaking on her behalf as well. And if other families feel the same way, I think they should speak up and bring this forward. I believe that this was presented in sort of a justice revamp bill. I don't know if it's been passed by legislature yet. I know from your colleague that they've started to combine some of these inquests with the one I mentioned, 7 over 8 days. I mean, it's up to the government to listen to its constituents and to revise, I would hope revise some of its plans for doing away with individual construction site coroner's inquests. I would also say, the legislation says that family can ask for a coroner's inquest, but you have to remember that also presupposes that we think we're going to find something. It kind of presupposes that there's something of value there. And sometimes you don't know until you get into it.
Mhm.
So there are going to be situations where, yes, the coroner is going to say, we could group these together and we will find commonalities that could eliminate. But what are you losing by taking the time? And as I've said, and I'll keep saying
Mhm.
when anyone asks me, is we've already gone through a ton of coroners inquests in the field of construction sites.
Mhm.
Implement those findings and those recommendations, and that will help you clear up your backlog because you won't have people dying from the same thing.
Mhm. And just as someone who's gone through this yourself, is it just as bad to not have it happen for a year or later, or is this something you can quantify? It's a terrible experience to go through either way, right? I would assume.
Yeah, there's it's sort of the family feels kind of cut adrift.
Hmm.
You have taken your loved one, you have had the funeral, you've had the burial,
Hmm.
and yet there is this thing hanging over your head. And I know that having gone through it, I can
Hmm.
say coroner's inquests are not intended to be a confrontational
No.
situation, but you worry that there's going to be blame placed on your family member, and how are
Mhm.
you going to deal with that? And you feel the need to defend them, even though there's nothing really to defend against.
Hmm.
But it's an open-ended situation that families live with
Hmm.
for up to 10 years in Ontario. And I certainly understand and respect the need to get it done sooner
Hmm.
from the family's perspective. When we finished the coroner's inquest, it felt like Tim had come home.
Hmm.
Uh, it he was he and his actions weren't subject to any kind of analysis by anyone other than us.
Right.
But he belonged to us again, as
Mhm.
opposed to the court, the coroner, evidence. He wasn't, his decisions weren't evidence anymore.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much for opening up and telling us all this today. That's you didn't have to do that. So thank you very much. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
If you'd like to hear other episodes of the Construction Record Podcast, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music, as well as on the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks for listening.